Hello, and welcome back to the Charles Aris podcast. I'm Clifton Vaughan, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Amanda Rutherford and Noah Schultz. And we're here to talk about our key takeaways from 2025 with respect to private equity portfolio operations teams. I'm Clifton. I have been with Charles Aris for 6 years now and have focused the majority of my career in our private equity fund level practice, with the majority of that work being placing individuals into the value creation or portfolio operations teams of leading private equity firms. Amanda, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Clifton. So I have been with Charles Aris about a year now. Been in this crazy business 10 years now, and I co-lead the fund level practice with Clifton Vaughan. Noah.
I am Noah Schultz. I've been with the organization over 2.5 years now, and I lead the AI strategy practice, helping to provide resources to private equity funds focused on leveraging AI for value creation.
Great, great. Uh, I think it would be most interesting to start with Noah, your topic area, which is AI, the big buzzword in 2025. And so would love to just hear a little bit about kind of what you're seeing and what are some of the most relevant insights for our listeners.
Sure. As many listening to this podcast are probably aware, AI is a hot topic right now across every single industry sector. And one of the parallels I see with where we're at now with the adoption of AI, specifically in private equity, but also just broadly across industries, it's very reminiscent of the mid 2000s as IT organizations migrated to the cloud. A lot of CIOs and CTOs knew we need to move our systems to the cloud. And that was about as far as their understanding went, as far as what's the next step? How do we create a function that guides us through that process? We are in the exact same place now with AI. And within private equity specifically, everyone knows AI is a powerful tool and a disruptive technology that will drive value capture and value creation at the fund and across their portfolio companies. But how to get there is the gray area almost all of the clients we work with are trying to navigate right now. There have been some early adopters and some leaders that have really embraced it, but we are starting to move into the phase where we see more market acceptance, more approaches, and there are really two key areas that we have seen successfully be navigated by private equity firms right now when it comes to formalizing a role and function within their firms. One are individuals that will create kind of a scalable playbook that can be applied broadly across the fund to boost productivity, to automate tasks, to allow individuals to do quite a bit more with the same amount of hours in the day. And that can range from due diligence efforts to understand what is the impact AI will have on potential investments that we're assessing for acquisition? What are the risks that are posed to certain industry segments and companies from AI? We need to understand that now before we execute any deals. On the portfolio operations side, we see individuals creating playbooks that can scale and be reused at portfolio companies to achieve the same automation, the same value creation. And then we also see individuals that have that unique blend of a technical background, oftentimes spending time with their hands on keyboards, writing code, writing software, building and deploying solutions, but then took a deviation in their career, went into management consulting and strategy consulting, and now are able to pair that understanding of technology and ability to bridge the gap between technical teams and business use cases to actually drive the development and implementation and transformation of those solutions. And it's a very exciting time seeing the impact some of these solutions are having in organizations.
Yeah. And hey, Noah, just so I'm thinking about it right, and for the listeners, it sounds like the roles that we're seeing pop up range from kind of more the strategic, like where to play, how to win, to the very technical, actually building the tools themselves for both the firm and the portfolio companies to leverage. Is that right?
That's correct. And just with any disruptive technology, you have to have a coherent strategy in place before you jump in with trying to build and deploy solutions. Because one of the pitfalls in engineering to software and computer engineering is, are we optimizing and building something that doesn't even need to exist? And understanding what we actually need is the key role these AI strategists play in helping to set that tone and direction before companies jump in with either purchasing off the shelf solutions or building their own bespoke solution.
And Noah, I know that each private equity is a little bit different, and that's the question we're getting, right? How are other firms doing it?
Mm-hmm.
As you talk to these firms, are they implementing the AI resource at the fund level first, at the portco level first, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. There are funds that have built their own internal platforms that they either allow portfolio companies licenses and access to, or are actually deployed almost like modules in an ERP system into the portfolio companies themselves. There are other funds that don't want to deal with the server hosting costs, with the deployment and long-term licensing arrangements after an exit, who instead look for individuals who can help guide the individual portfolio companies in selecting the systems and tools that best meet their needs, and then also guiding them through the actual development, deployment, and utilization of those solutions.
Great. Well, Noah, before we move on, are there any other key takeaways that you've observed in 2025 that you think will be prominent as we kind of move into 2026?
Yeah, there certainly have been some trends we've identified from different industry segments where it almost feels like there's some low-hanging fruit for AI adoption. The TMT sector, specifically with any type of company in the software or tech services industry, being able to build internal AI-powered tools to automate code migration, elimination of tech debt, optimization of how developers now write and deploy software products into the market. That is a very powerful use case for AI. Business and professional services are leaning in on AI being one of the key differentiators for the services they offer to their customers, as well as the healthcare and life science markets. Anything that requires very complex pattern recognition that historically we would have labs full of scientists focused on, or individuals that just have to put a lot of man hours into the actual work streams. There is a very clear use case identified already for immediate impact and value creation and capture leveraging these tools. As the software matures, I'm sure that other industry segments are going to start boiling to the top as well as these strategic leaders identify new ways to use the technology.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Well, gang, maybe I'll jump in, and I would love for both of you to kind of just give me your opinions. But if I had to describe one key theme that I've seen in portfolio operations for 2025, it's been the professionalization of the function. And I think at its core, historically, portfolio operations has been a little bit of a catch-all bucket. I almost just like to describe it as like the Wild West, and I think one of my favorite phrases I've stolen from someone in the industry was like, once you've met one portfolio operations team, you have met one portfolio operations team. And I still think that's very true today, but I do think firms are being a little bit more intentional about how they're building out these groups. And I mean, there's a lot of different things that informs what is the right model for a private equity firm. Everything from their investment thesis to kind of how large are their portfolio companies, what kind of support do they need, how granular is the firm's investment thesis, how similar are the topics going to be, if you will, across portfolio companies. But I do think firms historically have just been kind of adding headcount to there and being reactionary. But I feel like I'm seeing more and more firms be really intentional about like even, identifying what are the projects this individual is going to work on before they've even started to interview candidates. I think that definitely helps inform a search process and you just get a much better outcome. Everyone's more aligned if you know exactly where you're going to plug these people in on day one. The other thing I'd say that I feel like I'm hearing more and more about, and I'd be curious to you guys' thoughts on this, but like, I think firms are thinking about adding this capability earlier. Historically, the majority of the work we've done, I think, has been with private equity firms that I'll call established. They're on fund 3, fund 4, fund 5. They've been around for a number of years. But I think this year, I feel like I've had more conversations with funds who are still fundraising fund run or are still deploying fund one. Maybe they're just about to raise fund two. Just historically, I think this has been something that has been a part of larger firms. And I think the largest funds, the mega caps, have had these teams for a long time. But I think this is kind of trickling down the market. That's my personal opinion, but would be curious if you guys have seen something similar.
Awesome. Yeah, Clifton, I completely agree with you on all that.
Great. Great. Hey, maybe the only other thing that I would say that we've talked about in the past is I do feel like, portfolio operations, value creation, portfolio ownership group, whatever phrase private equity firms want to use for this, I do feel like it's becoming more and more of a best practice. I feel like there's a tangible difference between when I started my career in search versus today on like just how commonplace these firms are. And granted, there are firms that are at varying stages of maturity on this. I still talk to plenty of firms who have one person who is kind of responsible for all of their value creation initiatives for their portfolio companies. And those people are very busy. But I also have talked to firms that like maybe that was the case even just 2 years ago. And since they've scaled a team of 6 or 7 or 10, just depending on the needs. And so if the trend line continues, I think it'll be safe to say that the majority, I bet in the next 5 years, the majority of private equity firms will have multi-person value creation teams. Whereas today, I think it's probably closer to 50-50 if you look across the mega cap to the lower middle market funds.
Sure. So, as I've had client calls with existing and new clients, that conversation has come up, right? 1099 versus W-2. How often are you getting that question from potential and current customers?
All the time. And I think it's especially prominent with firms who are thinking about standing up these groups before or that don't have an existing infrastructure. And they're not sure if this is going to be something that's going to be critical to their investment thesis. There's a little bit of tepidity. I do feel like I sense that quite a bit.
Sure. And I think what I've seen, so it's that try before you buy, right? Is this the function we need? But also, there's more conversations that we're all having. We just heard from Noah about AI and that being a specialized field, right? Do we want to try out AI? Do we want to try out talent? Do we even want to try out a finance function on a part-time basis to determine if they are a value add and we need them full time? I think that's another area where we'll see that as a value add to a firm.
Yeah. The other thing, Amanda, that this makes me think about 1099 versus W-2 is like a large part of this is also informed by how firms pay for their value creation teams. So there's so many different models out there for this, but I think a lot of the time it'll depend on like, hey, is this person going to be dedicated to one portfolio company? And thus we want to build that one portfolio company, or are they loosely affiliated with the broader portfolio? And I think that can often color someone's kind of right answer on how should we pay this someone.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, just in the recent months, a good example of maybe not necessarily how they're billing, but do we have the budget for it? Is, we were on with a client a few months ago, right? Wanting to add AI, wanting to add talent, wanting to add finance, but they didn't have the budget, right? And the best scenario for them was bringing them in on a 1099 basis to try them out and truly test that function.
Totally.
I think another pro would be that this allows a firm to bring in a senior leader that maybe doesn't want to be full-time, right? They like project work, and that gives the firm the ability to access their skill set and their perspective. What are your thoughts in that regard?
No, totally agree. I think there are many private equity firms out there who will have a, lovingly referred to as problem portfolio company that needs a little bit more handholding and help. And I think in those instances, maybe you don't need a new CEO, but you definitely do need some more leadership and hands-on expertise. And thus, you're right. There's plenty of people who are kind of much more seasoned in their career and don't really need or want to work kind of full time anymore, but they're not ready to hang up the jacket. And thus, like some of these 1099 seats can actually be really attractive to those individuals.
Sure. Yeah. And then we might want to talk a little bit about the cons to a 1099 versus a W-2, right? 1099, obviously much more flexibility, but you can agree or disagree with me. What I see is that these people aren't fully bought in to the company and will likely take a call from a firm like ours to discuss their career.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, by nature of it, 1099 is kind of contract-based work. There isn't a career path promised to this individual. And I mean, I truly think the best candidates are hyper-focused on how do I grow as a professional and grow my career, and seldom are as excited about signing up for a finite opportunity. I also think, the compensation considerations are part of this as well. If I'm not mistaken, benefits, and I think even long-term equity is just not as realistic to deliver to someone who's on a 1099 versus a W-2. And in private equity, the long-term time horizon and equity upside is often a really attractive part of why people want to get into the space. So if you eliminate that, I think it can be a little bit more challenging to convert candidates into accepted employees.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think to add to that, the integration within the team too, and the process is much less, right? And that, in my mind, would slow down execution and just efficiencies if you're working cross-functionally within the organization as well. So in summary, when deciding between a W-2 and 1099 hire, context is everything. 1099s can be a great strategic fit for experimental roles or even for short-term experimental roles that don't have a long-term commitment. However, with clients, when they are building out a team with the goals of, wanting to build out long-term value, have institutional knowledge, and have cultural alignment, we do recommend that the most effective hire is full-time, right? These individuals are incentivized employees and they share in the long-term vision and success of the business.
Totally. Amanda, I think that's actually probably a really nice segue into maybe the last topic we had, which was around kind of portfolio operations increasingly becoming an attractive exit opportunity for professionals. And maybe I'll lead with two thoughts, and I'd be curious to see what you're seeing. But the first thing is actually pretty data backed. So Charles Aris, we're really well known for running the largest strategy recruiting practice in our industry, recruiting both current and former management consultants. And as a result of that, we do a lot of studies and compensation data, but also just kind of what is the general sentiment within these firms. And I think one really interesting insight from our 2024 current strategy consultant compensation study, which is on our website for anyone who's interested, is that it was almost 55% of individuals who said that if they were going to leave consulting, we asked them, what would you be interested in? 55% of people said portfolio operations. It actually, for the first time, I think, dethroned tech, which has historically, I think for the last 10 years, been the most attractive industry. And I think we're probably playing between industry and function with the way we're using this word, but I found that fascinating. What are you kind of seeing on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. With current consultants or even former consultants we're calling and talking to about these private equity operating roles, they're very enticing, right? It's not often that I get a no, I'm not interested, I don't want to hear about it, right? They're always willing to hear about it. And with the current consultants, it gets them out. They get so much more ownership in owning the process and the full outcome. Private equity in general is just very attractive.
Yeah. Hey, Amanda, in that vein, one other thing I think that has changed is once upon a time, I think there was a second-class citizenship nature of how people refer to these portfolio operations teams. And don't get me wrong, the culture around this really wildly varies firm to firm. But I would say that sentiment is less and less common as the years go by. I remember when I first started working on these roles, people were very concerned, hey, am I going to be respected and a valued part of the team? Whereas today, I would say that it seems like firms are putting more and more of a premium on getting the best talent in those roles, and thus making sure they feel like they are a meaningful part of the team and that their opinions are respected and matter. I think that has been a really positive trend for the industry at large. The other thing I was going to say is, Amanda, I think you're right. Private equity portfolio operations tends to be really attractive, especially to those who have consulting backgrounds, because I think it maintains some of the best parts of consulting, which is optionality, fast paced, working with a variety of different companies, but you still are one step closer to like building much deeper relationships and actually the implementation and realization of a value creation plan that you don't always get in your classic, strategy consulting environment, as well as there's often equity upside for you. Like your money is where your mouth is. And so you are probably just working slightly differently, knowing that you will benefit from kind of your great work versus in consulting. The what happens after you kind of submit your readout doesn't really affect you. And so I think that's another really interesting piece here.
Yep. I also think it's a really great step for a consultant to continue to add to their toolkit, especially if their long-term goal is to sit in a CEO or COO seat and own a P&L.
Totally. I tell people that all the time, but I really mean it. I think these are a really great launching pad into kind of C-suite businesses or C-suite positions within kind of PE-backed businesses. Awesome. Well, listeners, first of all, thank you so much for your time. If you've kind of gotten to this point of the podcast, again, I'm Clifton Vaughan. I help lead Charles Aris' private equity fund level practice, and I've been joined by Amanda Rutherford and Noah Schultz, also leaders in this practice. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about the space, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into the Charles Aris podcast. For more insights and resources, visit us at www.charlesaris.com. We'll see you next time.